When I was 14 years old, my father drove me and my younger sister to a deserted gas station, and then left, abandoning us to shiver in the dark night. I thought that was the end of my life. But at that very moment, a mysterious old man appeared, and later I would learn that he was not only my savior, but also the keeper of a secret that could change the course of our entire lives. Hello, my name is River Joseph. I am now 34 years old. Today I stand here in an office on the top floor of a magnificent building looking down at the bustling city below. From here I see streets glowing with lights, hurried crowds, and the fiery red sunset slowly descending. People look at me and perhaps they think I have it all. A thriving business, loyal employees, and a reputation that commands respect. They call me the promising young boss, an inspiration. But if I were to say that deep down, I'm still that trembling boy in the cold of an abandoned gas station, would they believe me? I don't often talk about myself, not because I'm hiding anything, but because every time those memories resurface, they hit me like a wave, pulling me back to the days I thought I had buried. But today, something compels me to speak. Perhaps it was the look in the eyes of a child I saw this morning as I passed through the old slums, a look that mirrored my own from 20 years ago. Hungry, scared, and full of confusion. I want to tell my story, not to boast, but to understand myself better, and perhaps to offer a glimmer of light to someone out there lost in their own darkness. I grew up in a neighborhood people called the bottom of society. There, curses were as common as meals, and the cries of children blended with the sound of liquor bottles shattering on the pavement. My home, if you could call it that, was a cramped apartment reeking of cigarette smoke and alcohol. My father, a gaunt man with bloodshot eyes, was always either drunk or irritable. My mother, oh my mother, she was once a gentle woman, but drugs stole her away, leaving behind an empty shell who either screamed or stared blankly into space. I had a younger sister, Lily, 3 years younger than me. She was the only light in that dark world. Whenever our parents fought, I would pull Lily into a corner of the room, hold her tightly, and cover her ears so she wouldn't hear the shouting or the sound of furniture being smashed. "Everything will be okay, Lily," I whispered, even though I didn't believe my own words. We survived those days by clinging to each other like two last leaves on a branch about to break. My childhood memories don't include picnics or Christmas gifts. They are of nights so hungry that my stomach ached, when I sneaked stale bread from the trash to share with Lily. They are of my father grabbing my hair, yelling that I was useless, or my mother in her drugged haze looking at me as if I were a stranger. But amidst that suffocating darkness, there was a tiny flicker of light, like a candle trembling in a storm. That light was a mysterious old man. I didn't know who he was, at least not at the time. He appeared suddenly like a figure lost from somewhere unknown. One afternoon, as I sat huddled on a street corner, hungry and with eyes stinging from a beating my father had given me, the old man approached. He was very old, with white hair and a stooped back, but his eyes shone with an extraordinary brightness, as if they held an untold story. He didn't say much, just sat down beside me and handed me a warm loaf of bread. "Eat, boy," he said, his voice low and warm. I looked at him, half suspicious, half grateful, and then devoured the bread as if it were my first meal ever. From then on, the old man appeared irregularly, but always at the moments I needed him most. Once he gave me a pair of worn but sturdy shoes that fit me perfectly. Another time, he quietly slipped a few coins into my pocket, enough to buy a carton of milk for Lily. He never asked too many questions or pressed me to talk about the bruises on my body, but every time he showed up, I felt as though someone in this world truly saw me, not as the useless boy my father called me, but as a human being. I remember one freezing winter night when Lily and I fled the house because my father was in a drunken rage. We sat huddled under an awning, the cold wind cutting through our skin. Lily was shivering uncontrollably, her lips turning blue. I held her close, trying to warm her with the little heat my body could offer. I thought we would freeze to death that night. But then the old man appeared like a miracle. Without a word, he took off his tattered coat and wrapped it around us. "Hang in there, kids," he whispered, then led us to a more sheltered corner of the street where the wind couldn't reach. He left us a thin blanket and some biscuits, then vanished into the darkness. I watched him go, my heart full of questions. Who was he? Why was he helping us? But I didn't have time to dwell on it. I had to keep Lily alive through the night. Those moments, however small, kept me from giving up. But life wasn't always full of glimmers like the old man. Most of the time, it was just a string of bleak days where I learned to survive by shrinking myself, hiding my emotions, and always being ready to run. I used to think that if there was a hell, I was already living in it. I began to understand that no matter how hard I tried, this world wasn't made for kids like me. In that neighborhood, drugs and violence were the only things that seemed to thrive. The neighbors, though not malicious, didn't have the means to help. They were struggling with their own lives. I remember once an old woman who lived across from us gave me a bowl of watery porridge, but her eyes were filled with helplessness, as if she knew that small gesture couldn't change our fate. Lily, my little sister, was the reason I didn't give up. She had big, sparkling eyes, but they were always tinged with fear. I promised her and myself that one day I would get her out of that place. I would give her a life where she wouldn't flinch at the sound of our father's heavy footsteps. I didn't know what path fate had in store for me, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. Each day that passed, I learned to endure, to hide my pain, and to keep my heart from breaking completely. But deep inside, I always carried a question. Why was life so harsh to Lily and me? And that mysterious old man, who was he, appearing like an angel on the edge between life and death? Those memories, painful as they are, shaped who I am today. I stand here in a tailored suit with the wealth and reputation many dream of, but I never forget where I came from. I'm not a hero, nor am I lucky. I'm just a boy who learned to survive and somehow found light in the darkness. But my story doesn't end with those days of hardship. It truly began when the greatest tragedy struck, when I thought the whole world had turned its back on me. That was when I realized that sometimes to find the light, you have to walk through the deepest darkness. When I was 12 years old, an age when a child should be playing, studying, and dreaming beautiful dreams, my world collapsed. My mother, the woman who had been a faint light in my life, was gone. Not because of illness or an accident, but because of an overdose. I still remember that moment like a searing pain tearing through my heart. I came home after a day of wandering and found her lying motionless on the floor. Her eyes were wide open, empty, as if staring through the ceiling. I didn't need anyone to tell me. I knew. She had overdosed. Next to her was a syringe rolling on the floor like a cruel mockery of fate. I stood there, unable to cry or scream. I only felt a cold void spreading through me, as if my heart had stopped beating along with hers. Lily, my 9-year-old sister, didn't understand what was happening. She grabbed my hand, her voice trembling. "Is Mom sleeping, River?" I couldn't answer. How could I explain that Mom had left us forever? I just held her tightly, shielding her from the sight of our mother's face so she wouldn't carry that horrific memory for the rest of her life. But I couldn't escape it myself. That night I lay next to Lily, listening to her steady breathing as she slept, and wondered, how could I protect her when I was falling apart? My father, a man I never fully called Dad, seemed unaffected by my mother's death. He didn't bother arranging a proper funeral. She brought it on herself. He growled, then turned away as if Mom were just a broken object. I looked at him, filled with rage, but I knew I was powerless. I was just a kid with no money, no strength, nothing but my skinny hands and a little sister who needed my protection. Just a few months later, my father remarried. The woman he brought home was a living nightmare. Her name was Helen, a gaunt figure with cold, piercing eyes and a shrill voice that could make anyone shudder. Helen didn't hide her contempt for me and Lily. To her, we were burdens, trash, that my father was stuck supporting. She didn't hit us, not out of kindness, but because she knew words could cut deeper than blows. "Who do you think you are, demanding food here?" she snapped when I asked for an extra piece of bread. "You and your sister are nothing but a waste of money." I clenched my teeth, swallowing my anger, knowing that if I fought back, my father would take her side. My father, now even worse than before, was egged on by Helen, becoming colder than ever. His beatings became more frequent, no longer just drunken outbursts, but deliberate acts of rage. I remember one time, just for breaking a glass, he grabbed my collar and punched me in the stomach until I collapsed. "You're truly useless," he roared while Helen stood there, arms crossed, a smirk on her lips as if she were enjoying the show. Lily sobbed, running to hug me, but all I could whisper was, "Don't be scared, I'm okay." I began to feel that this world had no place for us. With each passing day, I saw the light in Lily's eyes dim. She no longer talked about her dreams or told the innocent stories she used to. She grew quiet, fearful, and it broke my heart. I told myself I had to be strong to protect her, but deep down, I was terrified that I wouldn't be able to. I feared that one day I would break, and Lily would be left alone. The real tragedy struck when I was 14. It was a freezing winter night, the sky pitch black, without a single star. My father called me and Lily out of the house, telling us to get in the car. I thought he was taking us somewhere, but I never imagined it would be the last time I'd see him. The car stopped at an abandoned gas station, isolated on a desolate road. The smell of old gasoline and rust filled the air, and the flickering fluorescent light made the scene even more eerie. My father opened the car door and gestured for us to get out. "Stay here," he said, his voice as cold as ice. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Helen, sitting in the front seat, turned to look at us, her face twisted into a cruel smile. "Consider this your chance to be independent," she said, sneering. Before I could say anything, my father slammed the car door, floored the gas, and the car sped off, leaving me and Lily standing there in the bone-chilling cold and endless darkness. Lily clung to my hand, her lips trembling. "River, where's Dad going? He'll come back, right?" she asked, her voice breaking with fear. I wanted to lie, to comfort her that everything would be okay, but I couldn't. I just held her, trying to hold back my tears. We stood there, two abandoned children, penniless, with nowhere to go. It felt like the entire world had turned its back on us, as if no one in this world needed us anymore. I led Lily inside the gas station, finding a corner sheltered from the wind to sit. I wrapped my thin jacket tightly around her, trying to keep her warm. But the cold wasn't just from the weather. It came from the fear gnawing at my heart. I didn't know how we would survive, what tomorrow would bring. All I knew was that I couldn't let Lily suffer anymore. We sat there, shivering in the dark, time stretching on endlessly. I thought that was the end, that we would die there, forgotten like scraps on the side of life's road. But then, amidst that despair, a familiar figure appeared. The mysterious old man with his white hair and strangely bright eyes stepped out of the darkness. He didn't say a word, just knelt down and embraced us. "Don't be afraid," he whispered, his voice like a small flame warming my frozen heart. "I'll take you to a safe place." I didn't know where he would take us, but in that moment I felt a tiny spark of hope. The old man took my hand and Lily's, leading us away from the cold gas station into a journey I could never have anticipated. It was the fateful turning point, where the darkness of the past began to give way to a new light, faint but enough to make me believe that life still held miracles. That night, the wind cut like a knife, but the old man's hand was strangely warm. He led us to an empty lot behind the gas station where an old pickup truck sat quietly under the dim yellow light. The hinges creaked as he opened the door. Lily clung tightly to me, her wide eyes filled with fear, but she didn't cry. Perhaps she too sensed something from the old man, a sense of safety we had never known. Though my heart was full of doubt, I followed him. I had no other choice. Staying at the gas station meant death, not from the cold, but from the despair that would swallow us whole. We squeezed into the cramped cabin of the truck, the hoarse engine roaring to life, breaking the silence of the night. The truck rolled slowly, gliding through dark streets where the streetlights barely illuminated the puddles on the road. Finally, the pickup stopped in front of a small, weathered but tidy house, tucked behind a row of trees. Warm golden light spilled from the windows, like an invitation. The old man opened the door and gestured for us to come inside. "Come in, kids," he said, his voice low but gentle. I hesitated, scanning the small room. An old wooden table, a crackling fireplace, and the faint smell of freshly baked bread. It was all so unfamiliar to me. For the first time in my life, I felt what people call a home. The old man told us to sit, then brought out 2 steaming bowls of soup. The steam rose, blurring my vision, or perhaps it was the tears I was trying to hold back. Lily devoured her portion while I just stared at the bowl, unable to bring myself to eat. "What's wrong, boy?" the old man asked, sitting across from me. I shook my head, unsure of what to say. My heart was a tangled mess of gratitude, suspicion, and fear. "Eat," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You kids need strength." I ate, each spoonful of hot soup sliding down my throat, as if melting away the cold that had taken root in me for years. Lily finished with her meal, curled up on an old armchair, her eyes heavy. The old man draped a thin blanket over her, then turned to me. "Rest, River. We'll talk in the morning." I nodded, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay on the small bed he had prepared, listening to the crackle of the fireplace and Lily's steady breathing, my mind still racing with questions. Who was this old man? Why was he helping us? And more importantly, what did he want from 2 kids like us? The next morning, sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, waking me. Lily was still asleep, her face more peaceful than I had ever seen. I stepped into the living room and found the old man sitting at the table, a steaming cup of tea in front of him. He smiled and gestured for me to sit. "Boy, I think it's time you knew the truth," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of a long-held secret. I sat, my heart pounding. The old man looked at me, his eyes bright but carrying a deep sadness. "I'm your grandfather, yours and Lily's." His words hit me like thunder on a clear day. I was stunned, unable to believe my ears. Grandfather. I'd never heard my parents mention grandparents. To me, family was just me, Lily, and the nightmares of that wretched house. Seeing my confusion, the old man began to speak, his voice slow but filled with emotion, as if he were reopening a painful old book. He told me that he and my grandmother had once lived a comfortable life. They owned a small business, not grand, but enough to get by. They had a son, my father. But my father, even in his youth, had strayed down a dark path. Drugs, gambling, and lies. As he grew older, things only got worse. He paused, taking a deep breath as if the memory still caused him pain. "One day, my son, your father, came to us saying he owed a large sum to the mafia. He cried, begged, said that if he didn't pay, the whole family would be killed. Your grandmother and I believed him. We sold everything we had, borrowed money from everyone we knew, and gave him everything, but..." His voice broke. "He betrayed us. He took the money and disappeared, leaving us drowning in debt." I sat there, frozen. His story was like another knife cutting into what little trust I had left. My father, who had abandoned me and Lily, had also betrayed his own parents. I wanted to scream, to smash something, but I just sat there, my hands gripping the chair tightly. The old man continued, his voice trembling. "Your grandmother, worn out by exhaustion and illness, passed away not long after. I lost everything, our home, our business, and my lifelong partner. I spent years struggling to pay off the debts, living like a shadow, holding on to the hope that one day I'd find you and Lily. I watched from afar, but your father never let me come close. Yesterday, when I saw you at the gas station, I knew it was heaven giving me a chance to make things right." Tears fell silently down his wrinkled cheeks. I looked at him, my heart constricting. The pieces of my memories clicked into place. The times the old man appeared, the loaves of bread, the worn shoes, the blanket in the winter night. It wasn't random. It was the love of a grandfather quietly watching over us from a distance, even as he carried his own deep wounds. "I thought I'd lost you forever," he said, his voice choking. "But now you're here and I won't let you suffer anymore." I didn't know how to respond. My trust in people had long been crushed, but the look in the old man's, my grandfather's eyes made me want to believe again. I stood up, walked to him and hugged him without a word. For the first time in my life, I felt an embrace that wasn't meant to punish but to protect. My grandfather's small house became our sanctuary. It wasn't luxurious, lacking the comforts I had once dreamed of as a child, but it had something Lily and I had longed for: love. Every morning I woke to the smell of coffee my grandfather brewed and the sound of him softly humming an old folk song. He prepared breakfast for us, slices of toasted bread with jam, sometimes a boiled egg. Lily, the quiet and fearful little girl, began to change. She smiled more, telling innocent stories about the birds in the garden or the clouds she imagined as fantastical shapes. Watching her, my heart was both joyful and aching. Joyful because she was reclaiming the childhood that had been stolen from her, aching because I knew the scars in her heart were still there, hidden behind her smiles. I made a silent vow to myself. I would do everything to protect that newfound light in her eyes. Grandfather didn't just give us a home, he gave us a future. He enrolled Lily and me in school where, for the first time, I could sit in a classroom without worrying about being expelled for unpaid fees. He bought us new clothes, not expensive but clean and well-fitting. I remember the first time I wore a shirt he picked out for me, standing in front of the mirror, feeling awkward in my unfamiliar reflection. "You look like a real student, River," he said, smiling. Those simple words made me want to cry. For the first time, I felt I wasn't the useless boy my father had called me. But Grandfather didn't just provide for us materially. He taught Lily and me lessons no school could offer: the value of hard work, honesty, and above all, dignity. "Money can be lost, River," he would say, his voice steady and firm. "But no one can take away your character. That's a person's greatest asset." His words carved themselves into my mind like a torch lighting the path ahead. I began to understand that no matter how painful my past was, I could choose to live in a way that was worthy. School became my escape. I wasn't the brightest student, but I was the most diligent. I studied as if every word was a brick building my future. Every night I sat at the old wooden table in the living room, under the flickering light of an oil lamp, diligently solving math problems or memorizing literature. Grandfather would sit nearby, quietly reading the newspaper or fixing household items, but I knew he was watching me. Occasionally he'd look up and smile. "Keep it up, River. You'll go far." Those words were my motivation to keep going, even on days when exhaustion made me want to collapse. Lily, too, began to find joy again. She loved drawing, and Grandfather, despite his modest means, bought her a box of colored pencils. Her drawings of houses, fields, or Grandfather's kind smile covered the walls of the house. Each time I looked at them, I felt a sense of relief. She was healing, and so was I, however slowly. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Memories of my father, my mother, the hungry nights, and the sound of angry shouts would resurface, often when I least expected them. Some nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the image of my father abandoning us at the gas station vivid in my mind. I'd sit up, glance at Lily sleeping peacefully beside me, and tell myself to be stronger. Grandfather seemed to understand, even though I never spoke of it. One day he called me to the backyard where he tended a few small apple trees. "River," he said, pointing to a young tree bent by a storm. "This tree is weak, but it's still alive. You're the same. What you've been through doesn't define you. It only makes you stronger." I nodded silently, but deep down I knew he was right. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose how it shaped my future. Slowly I learned to trust, not just Grandfather, but myself. I began to dream bigger dreams, not just escaping the slums, but building a life that Lily and I could be proud of. I wanted to prove that no matter where I came from, I could rise. And grandfather, the true father I never had, was the one who planted the seeds for those dreams. The years living with my grandfather were the time when I learned to stand tall, no longer bowing my head to painful memories. He didn't just give Lily and me a home. He gave us a foundation, not of money, but of belief that we deserved a better life. I held on to his words, "Knowledge is the key to changing your fate." Those words became my guiding compass, leading me through the long days of studying in school. School wasn't easy. I wasn't a genius, but I had a persistence I didn't even know I possessed. Every night I sat at an old wooden table under the flickering light of an oil lamp, poring over books. Math, literature, history. They were like doors opening to a new world, one where I was no longer the abandoned boy left at a gas station. Lily worked just as hard. She was smart, diligent, and had a warm heart that I quietly cherished. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, wanting to help people like our mother, those beaten down by life. I watched her drawings now replaced by notebooks filled with meticulous notes, and I knew she was fighting her own battle, in her own way. After years of effort, I entered university, majoring in business administration. It was a completely new world. Sprawling lecture halls, challenging lessons, and classmates from backgrounds I couldn't have imagined. At times, I felt out of place, like I didn't belong. But whenever I wanted to give up, I thought of my grandfather, of the pride in his eyes when I received a scholarship. I gritted my teeth, studied day and night, worked part-time at a cafe to cover expenses, and slowly I found my footing. On graduation day, I stood on the stage, my cap and gown fluttering, my heart overflowing with emotion. My grandfather sat in the audience, his eyes glistening with tears. "This is the greatest reward of my life," he said, his voice choked as he hugged me after the ceremony. I looked at him, the man who had sacrificed everything to give Lily and me a chance, and I knew every effort I'd made was to honor him. But I didn't choose an easy path after graduation. While my friends sought stable jobs at big corporations, I decided to return to my grandfather and work for the small business he had rebuilt from ashes. It was just a modest company supplying medical equipment with a handful of employees in a cramped office. To me, it wasn't just a job. It was my grandfather's legacy, proof of his resilience after what my father had done. In the early days, I handled simple tasks, checking the books, delivering goods, meeting clients with him. I learned to listen, to negotiate, and to face rejection head-on. Sometimes I felt small compared to larger competitors with abundant resources. But my grandfather always reminded me, "You don't need to be bigger than them, just better." I started applying what I'd learned, from university lectures, from his teachings, and from the years I'd survived adversity. I suggested small but effective changes, improving inventory management, building relationships with local hospitals, and exploring new markets. I remember convincing a major hospital to sign a contract with us, even though they initially doubted a small company like ours. When I brought the good news back, my grandfather looked at me, his eyes filled with both pride and surprise. "River," he said, "you're doing things I never dared to dream of." Gradually, the company began to grow. From a cramped office, we moved to a larger space. From a few employees, we built a small but tight-knit team. I wasn't just working for money. I wanted to prove that what my grandfather had built was never meaningless. Every new contract, every satisfied client was my way of telling him, "I did it, Grandpa." But I knew success wasn't just about numbers. It was the radiant look in Lily's eyes when she received her acceptance letter to medical school. It was my grandfather's smile when he saw me confidently presenting to partners. And above all, it was the feeling that I was living a meaningful life, no longer weighed down by the shadows of my past. Yet I wasn't naive. I knew the past never truly disappears. The scars in my heart remained, and I always had a nagging feeling that one day the ghosts of those old days might return. But now, I was no longer the helpless boy. I had knowledge, determination, and most importantly, I had my grandfather and Lily. people who reminded me that no matter how harsh life could be, I could still choose to stand up and keep moving forward. In the years that followed, I poured my heart and soul into my grandfather's company. From a small enterprise, we began to rise. I didn't shy away from late nights, long trips to meet partners, or the sting of rejection. I learned that success doesn't come from luck, but from fierce determination and persistence. I improved everything, from management to business strategies. I built relationships with major hospitals, convincing them that a small company like ours could be more reliable than the industry giants. And slowly they began to trust me. The company started to gain recognition. Our name, tied to the values my grandfather instilled, integrity, honesty, and quality, became a brand that major partners sought out. I remember one afternoon after signing a contract with a prestigious hospital chain, I stood in our new office and thought of my grandfather. "Do you see, Grandpa?" I whispered to myself. "I'm making it happen." To the employees, I wasn't just the boss. They saw me as a young leader, full of ambition, but also as an example. I didn't hide my past. I told them about the hungry days, the cold gas station, and how my grandfather saved me. I wanted them to know that no matter where they came from, they could rise just as I had. And I saw them work not just for money, but for the belief that we were building something meaningful together. Meanwhile, Lily was shining in her own way. She had become a medical intern, her eyes sparkling as she talked about surgeries or the patients she helped. I looked at her, now a strong, intelligent, and compassionate woman, and I couldn't have been prouder. "River," she once said, smiling brightly, "I want to save people like Mom, so no one has to leave like she did." Her words pierced my heart, but they also made me believe she would succeed. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. The company was thriving, Lily had a bright future, and my grandfather, though aged, was still healthy, still the beacon guiding me and Lily. But life, as I learned early on, never lets you stay comfortable for long. One day, I noticed my grandfather weakening. He coughed more, ate less, and his eyes, though still bright, carried a hint of fatigue. I took him to the doctor, and the devastating news hit like a punch. He had cancer, terminal stage. The doctor said he didn't have much time left. I stood in the hospital corridor, feeling like the world was collapsing again. I'd lost my mother, been abandoned by my father, but losing my grandfather, the man who gave me everything, was something I couldn't bear. I put all projects and meetings on hold to be by his side. Lily took leave from the hospital, and together we cared for him. We took turns sitting by his bed, telling stories, listening to his laughter, and trying to hold on to every moment. He remained optimistic, still sharing stories about my grandmother and the hard times he'd overcome. But I could see him fading, like a candle nearing its end. One night, when it was just him and me in the small room, he gripped my hand tightly. His hands, once strong enough to lead me away from that gas station, were now trembling and cold. "River," he said, his voice weak but resolute, "live a life worthy of what you've been through and use that strength to protect yourself and those you love." I nodded, tears streaming down my face, unable to speak. That was the last time he spoke to me. When I was 27, my grandfather passed away. I stood by his coffin, feeling like a part of my heart had gone with him. Lily clung to me, sobbing, and I held her, trying to be strong as he'd taught me. But inside, the pain was so overwhelming I could barely breathe. He wasn't just the man who saved Lily and me, he was our father, our teacher, and the flame that guided me through the darkness. According to his will, I inherited his entire legacy, the company, the house, and the values he left behind. I became the leader, but the responsibility was far from light. I carried with me pride, pain, and the duty to preserve his legacy. Every day I walked into the office, looked at his photo on the wall, and told myself, "I won't let you down, Grandpa." The company continued to grow, not just as a business, but as a testament to what my grandfather had built from ashes. I worked tirelessly, not out of ambition, but because I wanted his legacy to live on. But I never expected that this very success would act like a beacon, drawing the moths of my past, ghosts I thought had vanished forever. One afternoon, as I was reviewing financial reports in the office, my secretary informed me that 2 people wanted to see me. "They say they're your family," she said, her voice hesitant. I frowned, a sense of unease rising within me. Family? Besides Lily, I had no one else. I told her to let them in, and when the door opened, my heart seemed to stop. Standing before me was my father, the man I hadn't seen since that cold night at the gas station. And beside him was Helen, my stepmother, whose cruel smile had haunted my childhood. My father looked older, his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes were as cold and sharp as ever. Helen, on the other hand, tried to appear soft, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. They stepped into the room, and the air grew heavy, as if my entire past was flooding back, weighing on my shoulders. I sat still, gripping the edge of the desk, trying to maintain a calm facade. But inside, a storm of emotions churned. Not just anger, but a mix of disgust and pain. "River, my son," my father began, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "I've been looking for you for so long. We're still family, aren't we? You've done so well, and I'm proud of you." His words cut like a knife, not because they were sharp, but because they were so blatantly insincere. I looked at him, remembering the moment he left Lily and me at the gas station, the sound of his car's tires rolling away in the dark, and I wanted to shout, "What family?" Helen chimed in, her voice trembling, feigning remorse. "River, I know I wasn't a good mother back then, but I was just a stepmother. I had no choice. Seeing you succeed now, I'm so happy." She wiped away tears, but I saw through the pretense in every gesture. The memories of her verbal abuse, of her standing by while my father hit me, came rushing back, as vivid as if they'd happened yesterday. I wanted to stand up and throw them out, but I restrained myself. I didn't want them to see me lose control. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. My father smiled, the same smile that used to terrify me but now only filled me with contempt. "River, you understand," he said smoothly. "This company, this wealth, it's the sweat and tears of our family. I just want you to share a little, because we're blood, because you owe us." I laughed, but not out of amusement. It was a bitter, hollow laugh, carrying the weight of all the years Lily and I had to survive in the dark. "Family," I repeated, looking straight into his eyes. "The man who left me and Lily in the middle of the night in the freezing cold lost the right to call me his son that day." My voice was calm, but each word landed like a hammer. "Owe you? What did you ever give us besides pain and abandonment?" Helen paled and my father stiffened. He tried to maintain his composure, but I saw his hands tremble. "River, you can't talk to your father like that," he growled. But I was no longer the scared 14-year-old boy. I stood up, stepping closer to them, my gaze unwavering. "You have no right to come here and demand anything. You're not my family. My family is my grandfather, Lily, and the people who stood by me when you turned your backs." This reunion wasn't a reconciliation. It was a confrontation between betrayers and a survivor. I looked at them, saw the greed plain in their eyes, and knew they weren't here out of remorse. They came for money, for the success I'd built with my sweat and tears. But I would never let them touch my grandfather's legacy, not ever. I signaled for security to escort them out. My father tried to say something, but I turned away, refusing to hear another word. When the door closed, I sat down, my hands trembling. The image of that cold gas station flashed in my mind, but this time I wasn't afraid. But my father and Helen weren't ones to give up easily. They didn't come back to me, perhaps knowing I'd never yield. Instead, they targeted Lily, my little sister, whom they thought was an easy mark. One afternoon, while I was in the office, my phone rang. Lily's voice came through, no longer trembling as it once did, but sharp and resolute. "River," she said, "Dad and Helen just came to the hospital. They wanted to see me." I gripped the phone tightly, anger flaring like wildfire. "Are you okay?" "What did they say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Lily explained that my father and Helen had shown up at the hospital where she was interning. using the same honeyed words they'd tried on me. They told me I owe them, that I need to help family because you're too stubborn, she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. They wanted me to convince you to share the money or at least give them something to get through tough times. I was about to tell her to cut contact immediately, but she continued, and this time her voice was filled with pride. River, I'm not that scared little girl anymore. I told them straight, you're not my family. My family is River and Grandpa. You abandoned us and don't expect my pity now. Helen tried to cry, but I told them to leave or I'd call the police. I sat in silence, overwhelmed with emotion. My Lily, the little girl who once trembled in my arms at the gas station, had grown into a strong woman capable of standing up to those who'd hurt us. You did great, Lily, I said, my voice catching. If they come back, call me right away, okay? Lily gave a soft laugh over the phone. Don't worry, River. I know how to protect myself, and I know you're always there. That call made me realize that I wasn't the only one who'd changed. Lily had grown up carrying the fire my grandfather had kindled, the fire of resilience and self-respect. My father and Helen thought she was the weak link, but they were wrong. We, brother and sister, had survived the darkness together, and none of them could drag us back. I knew this confrontation wasn't the end. My father and Helen, with their greedy nature, wouldn't stop easily. But I wasn't afraid. I had Lily, my grandfather's legacy, and the truth, the sharpest weapon I'd learned from him. I told myself that no matter what they did, Lily and I would stand strong, like two saplings that had weathered the storm thanks to the love and faith my grandfather had given us. But I wasn't naive. They had caught the scent of money, and I knew they'd come back with sweeter words or worse, new schemes. I couldn't let them have a chance to touch my grandfather's legacy or hurt Lily again. I'd survived the darkness, and now I was determined that they would never exploit me again. I took action, but not out of anger. I learned from my grandfather that true revenge doesn't require fists or shouting. It requires the truth, sharp and undeniable. I contacted a lawyer I trusted, one who had worked with my grandfather during tough times. I need everything on my father, I said, my voice calm but resolute. Everything he's done from the past to the present. In the weeks that followed, my lawyer and I quietly dug into the past. We uncovered old records, documents my grandfather had kept as a reminder of my father's betrayal. I found evidence of the scam from years ago, how my father fabricated a story about owing the mafia to swindle my grandparents' wealth and then disappeared with the money. But I didn't stop there. I hired a team of investigators to look into what my father and Helen had been doing in the years they were gone. The results didn't surprise me, but they still sent a chill down my spine. My father was entangled in a web of shady deals, from loan sharking and illegal trading to scamming gullible people. Helen, who had once egged him on, was no cleaner. They lived a life on the run, drowning in debt, and now, hearing of my success, they saw me as an easy target. I chose my moment to act. A press conference where I was set to announce a new contract with a major partner became the stage for the truth. Before a crowd of reporters, partners, and employees, I didn't just talk about the company's future. I told my story. I spoke of my grandfather, his sacrifices, and how my father had deceived and abandoned us. I presented evidence, documents, figures, names. This isn't a story of revenge, I said, my voice ringing through the silent auditorium. This is a story of justice, of bringing what belongs in the dark into the light. The news spread like wildfire. Newspapers, social media, and street conversations buzzed with talk of my father and Helen. They became the target of public scorn. Friends turned their backs, neighbors despised them, and creditors, sensing an opportunity, began hunting them down. Helen, revealing her greedy, bitter nature, tried to justify herself on social media, only to face a barrage of criticism. My father, once arrogant, crumbled completely. His reputation vanished, his wealth was gone, and debts closed in like an inescapable net. But the story didn't end there. The truth, once exposed, was like a wildfire spreading uncontrollably. After the press conference, when the documents about my father's scams were made public, the wave of criticism on social media and in the press didn't stop at words. Articles dug deeper, interviewing victims of my father and Helen from their years in hiding. Each story was a piece of the puzzle, painting a picture of a couple who lived by deceit and greed. What I didn't expect was the attention from the police. One morning, as I was preparing for a meeting, my phone rang. It was my lawyer, his voice excited but cautious. "River, the police just contacted me. They want to meet you. The documents you released have sparked an official investigation into your father and Helen." I froze, my heart pounding. I hadn't expected things to go this far. I only wanted to protect my grandfather's legacy, Lily, and myself. But now, the truth I'd brought to light had become the key to unlocking another door, a door to real justice. I met with the police the next day. They showed me a long list of charges: fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and even ties to an illegal trading network my father had been part of. The shady deals my investigators and I uncovered were just the tip of the iceberg. It turned out that during their years in hiding, my father and Helen had delved deep into an underworld, exploiting the trust of many for profit. Victims, from my grandfather's old friends to business partners, began to come forward. Helen, with her venomous nature, tried to pin the blame on my father during interrogations. But the messages, emails, and documents the police collected exposed her role, from instigating my father's scams to being complicit in their schemes. They were arrested, and for the first time, I felt the weight of true justice. Not the justice I delivered myself, but the justice the law brought, built on the truth I had exposed. The trial took place a few months later. I didn't attend, not out of fear, but because I didn't want to see them again. My father was sentenced to 10 years in prison for a litany of crimes, from fraud to embezzlement. Helen received 7 years for complicity and fraud. Their last home was seized to pay off debts, but it was a drop in the bucket compared to what they owed. They lost everything, not just money and reputation, but their freedom. When the news broke, I sat in my office looking at my grandfather's photo. I didn't feel victorious, but I felt at peace. "Do you see, Grandpa?" I whispered. The truth did what I couldn't. My father and Helen had paid the price, not just before society, but before the law. They lost everything, and most importantly, they lost me. The son they once saw as a burden, the one they abandoned in the cold, dark night. One quiet afternoon after the trial, Lily and I visited our grandfather's grave. The cemetery was peaceful, with only the soft rustle of wind through the trees. I placed a bouquet of white daisies on his grave, his favorite flower, and stood in silence, feeling as if he were still here, watching over us. Lily knelt, gently touching the headstone, her voice choked with emotion. "Grandpa, River did it. He protected us just like you did." I looked at her, tears falling silently. "You gave us everything," I said, my voice trembling, "and I promise to live worthy of what you left us." We stood there, brother and sister, by the grave of the man who had saved our lives. The scars of the past remained, but in that moment I felt healing, not from time, but from the undying love of our grandfather. On a peaceful afternoon, looking out over the city's twinkling lights from the top floor of the company, I realized how far I'd come. From a trembling boy at a cold gas station, I was now the head of a thriving company, respected by employees and trusted by partners. But more than that, I was no longer haunted by the shadows of my past. The scars remained, but they were no longer painful. They had become my strength, proof of what I'd overcome. Lily, my little sister, was now a full-fledged doctor. I still remember the day she donned her white coat, standing in front of the hospital with a radiant smile. "River, I did it," she said, her eyes sparkling with pride. I hugged her, my heart overflowing. She wasn't just healing patients. She was healing herself and a part of me. But Lily's journey didn't stop there. She found love, a kind man, a fellow doctor named David, who looked at her with eyes full of love and respect. When she told me about him, I saw her smile, the smile I once thought would never return after those years of pain. Lily's wedding day was one of the most beautiful moments of my life. I stood outside the church holding her hand, feeling the small hand that once clung to me in that cold gas station night now stronger. She wore a pristine white wedding dress, her eyes shining like stars. As I walked her down the aisle, I looked at David waiting at the altar and knew she had found a safe harbor. Before handing her to the groom, I gripped David's hand, looking him straight in the eyes. "Lily is my entire world," I said, my voice low but firm. "Cherish and protect her because she deserves all the love in the world." David nodded, his eyes sincere. "I promise, River. I'll spend my life making her happy." I stood there watching Lily exchange vows, and in my heart I recalled the promise I made long ago, to protect her, to give her a life free from shouts and fear. I had kept my word. Lily now had her own family, a warm home, and a husband who loved her unconditionally. They worked together at the hospital, saving lives, and every time I visited, I saw her glowing like a flower finally basking in sunlight. She still drew, but now her sketches were of happiness. A small house, a garden, and sometimes images of me and our grandfather, the ones who guided her through the darkness. During a company anniversary celebration, I stood before employees, partners, and unfamiliar faces. My grandfather's photo hung prominently behind me, a silent guide. I looked at it and whispered to myself, "I've done it just as you told me." I shared my story, not to boast, but to inspire. I spoke of the hungry days, the cold gas station, and my grandfather, the man who taught me that dignity is a person's greatest asset. "Success isn't about money or fame," I said, my voice resonating in the quiet auditorium. "It's about living true to what you believe in and using your strength to protect those you love." I decided to establish a scholarship fund in my grandparents' names dedicated to abandoned children and those from difficult backgrounds like Lily and me. I wanted them to know that no matter how harsh life is, they have a chance. Each time I saw a student receive the scholarship, I saw myself in them, a hungry boy who never stopped dreaming. I wanted them to have someone like my grandfather, even if only through the small support I could offer. Standing at the pinnacle of my career, I realized that family isn't about blood. It's about love, sacrifice, and trust. My father and Helen, who thought blood gave them rights, had thrown that away themselves. But my grandfather, who didn't hesitate to save 2 children in the dark of night, became my true family. His love transformed me from an abandoned boy into the man I am today. My conclusion isn't a grand promise, but a simple message. Live worthy of what you've been through. Use your pain to make you stronger, and use love to light the path ahead. That's what my grandfather taught me, and it's what I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. 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 Of my life.